Many of our analytics already have all the data they need, ready to be fed right into our models that we're going to use to predict likely outcomes or to discover hidden insights. These data are already stored and available in our big data environments, and maybe they're also in our older data warehouses. Additionally, we also have updates to these data regularly being fed into our big data environment, so we always have the most current data available to run through our models. In other cases, though, it may turn out that not everything we need is there at our fingertips, even if we've already built the most robust and comprehensive big data environment that you can imagine. In some cases, we may need additional data subjects or attributes before we can prove or disprove a hypothesis that we've already begun working on. Sometimes we have all the data subject and attributes that we're going to need, we just don't have deep enough data. So in other words, we have to add additional time frames, maybe additional weeks or months or even years worth of data before we can then prove or disprove a hypothesis. Let's take a look at a simple example where our analytical models are constantly processing data from devices and systems all over our enterprise, and we're doing this for the early possible alerts for intrusions and various forms of cyber attacks. In this example, we start to receive some abnormal data from Region 1 within our enterprise, and our analytical models immediately go to work processing this new data, along with whatever other content's relevant for their particular predictive and discovery models. What happens, though, is that the results are inconclusive. Something's definitely odd, but it's not necessarily odd enough to be able to form a hypothesis that an intrusion or a cyber attack has actually begun. So what we do then is add additional data. We take a look, in this case, at regions 2 and 3 to see if we notice the same anomalies that we saw in region 1. And in this particular case, it turns out that yes, we do. Now, the way our models are set up, if we see these anomalies across more than one region, they will indeed form the hypothesis that something is up with regards to an intrusion or a cyber attack, and then proceed along that course of action. When we talk about data correlations, our prescriptive analytic workflows actually need to accommodate two different types of correlations. The simpler type you see at the top is when we already know what additional data we're going to need to bring in as part of our predefined workflow, and that good example of that is what we just looked at. In other cases, though, our analytical models may indicate something that is just so totally unprecedented or unplanned that despite all of our prior planning work and involvement from the subject matter experts, we're just now in uncharted territory. In these cases, data correlation is as important as ever, but we now need to determine on the fly what additional data subject areas we're going to need or additional depth to data, and then where that data is going to come from. Sometimes the new data might actually already be available in our big data environments. It just wasn't part of this original set of analytics. So all we have to do then is quickly adjust our models to incorporate all this new data that we need and then go from there. But in other cases, though, we may not even have the big data already in our big data environment or anywhere else in our enterprise. So what we need to do is quickly locate an appropriate source for that data and load it as quickly as possible so it's available for analysis. Fortunately, though, the high-velocity models of big data are very well suited to rapidly acquiring new data as part of dynamic correlation. So whereas in the past with traditional data warehousing, what we might need to do then is all this significantly complex upfront analysis work to figure out how the new data would be loaded into our data warehouse and how it would fit alongside our existing data. But with our modern big data technology, we're able to load the new data very quickly and dynamically and then use it very quickly as part of our data correlation and then proceed from that point along our workflow. We've already seen how data correlation is a key aspect to being able to progressively enrich the business impact of our analytical models and also the prescriptive actions that come out of those models. We also saw that in some cases, we may need to bring additional data into our models to expand and deepen those business insights that we want to draw or the questions that we want to ask, and then have our analytical systems answer. Let's take a look at an example of a state-level Department of Transportation, and specifically the agency within that department that's responsible for road safety. As you see here, their high-level mission is broken down into more detailed specific responsibilities, such as understanding how weather situations impact road safety, managing speed limits, doing the long-term planning for road improvements based on how traffic loads are projected to increase over the next however many years, and also coordinating with the state police and other agencies as needed. Let's say that our road safety agency begins by building sophisticated predictive and discovery analytical models that primarily use three types of data: road traffic data, accident data, and weather data. And to get themselves started, they begin with 3 years of historical information from each of these sets of data. Using their models in this initial set of data, they can ask critical business questions such as those you see here. For example, they will be able to tell over the past 3 years at what snowfall levels do the interstate highways within the state become extra dangerous. They can also determine how the safety statistics compare between the interstate highways as well as state roads. They can also look at all the highways within the state and determine if some are safer than others despite having the same snowfall levels, and if so, what are the factors that make some roads safer than others. They can also ask how much preventative road treatment, such as salting and spraying, before a snowfall actually begins will result in a meaningful reduction in the level of accidents. They can also look at the accident levels during bad weather and determine if anything other than weather-related conditions might also have played a role in high levels of accidents. Now, let's say that as part of the state's planning process or in the course of day-to-day operations, additional questions are raised that actually can't be answered by the models using this initial set of data from these subject areas and with only 3 years. What the agency then decides to do is add depth to their data. In other words, for the exact same subject areas that they have and are currently analyzing, they simply go deeper. And in this case, by adding additional historical data into the mix. By expanding their data sets from 3 years to 8 years, they can run the same data through the same models, but still come up with an entirely new set of insights and hypotheses. They can still ask and answer the same questions that we've already looked at, though with that additional 5 years of historical data, they might actually start to receive different answers. This in turn spurs an entirely new set of important questions and insights that previously they were unable to ask or answer when they only had 3 years of data. For example, now they can ask, since the opening of the 2 new interstate highways within the state over the past 3 years, what's happened to the overall accident patterns? They can also look at this deeper level of historical information and ask if the primary accident factors during the initial analysis period of 3 years are the same as they were during the previous 5 years. And then, let's say that the maximum speed limit within the state was changed 4 years ago. They can look at the relative accident and safety levels both before and after that speed limit change. So as we see, we can ask more questions than we were able to ask before and do even deeper analysis, but this may not even be enough. Now let's say that they want to bring in driver license data, and in this case, they bring in 10 years worth of driver's license data. With this additional data, they can ask even more questions, and this is called adding breadth to the data available for correlation. Now they can ask if there are any relationships between the number of licensed drivers in the state at any given point and what the relative road safety levels were, and if so, how that correlated with when the new interstate highways were opened. They can also look at if there's any relationship between drivers who get into accidents during bad weather as well as their overall driving records, regardless of weather, things like tickets and non-weather related accidents. They can also determine if there's any significance between how far away from home someone might be and the likelihood of an accident, and if indeed there is some significance there, if there is a specific time of day or day of the week that happens to stand out, and then they could take actions based on those insights. To finish up this example, let's add even more breadth to our data. Now we have 8 years of road traffic, accident, and weather data, 10 years of driver license data, and we're actually going to add 10 years of tax return data from our state Department of Revenue. Now, with even broader and deeper data, we can ask an even richer set of questions and gain an even more robust set of insights to drive even more actions. For example, we can look at the relationship between somebody's income, that person's driving record, and then their accident record. We can ask some very specific targeted questions, such as if a single male under the age of 25 with an income less than $25,000 and who works in one of several specific job categories is more likely to get into accidents at any time or maybe only during bad weather. So far, we haven't really focused on the time element of our prescriptive analytics workflow. We've looked at the steps that precede others and how the workflow progresses, but we haven't really looked at situations where time is of the essence and literally every second might count and make a difference. Some analytics workflows, though, are indeed high velocity in nature. In other words, the elapsed time from initially capturing new data and triggering an event until the point at which prescribed actions need to be taken needs to be as short as possible, minutes maybe, or perhaps even only seconds. Even analytics that aren't high velocity in nature still need to be handled proactively and as rapidly as possible to be effective. But in general, they do tend to have less complex workflows, typically a single pass from the point at which we capture data all the way through to when we take their prescribed actions. In these cases, fast may be a matter of hours or days or even longer for many strategic type of analytics. High-velocity analytics, though, often involve multiple passes through our workflow, with processes looping back to some previous point as new data is acquired and processed. In some cases, we may even overturn a previously determined hypothesis as a result of new data, and that means that our high-velocity analytics tend to be volatile in nature. Let's go back to our earlier example of feeding data from network devices all around our enterprise into an analytical engine to try to determine as quickly as possible if a cyber attack or some sort of intrusion is underway. In this particular scenario, the engine receives data from region 1, processes it, and then feeds it back and notices nothing seems to be amiss. The hypothesis at this point, there's no attempted intrusion. Now let's say as part of our workflow, the data from regions 2 and 3 are added to the data from region 1, and the broader and deeper content is run through the analytical engines. At this point, though, with the enriched set of data, our models happen to pick up something that seems amiss. And as a result, they form a brand new hypothesis that indeed we do have an intrusion. So as we see, some analytics do tend to be very volatile in nature as new data is acquired and processed very quickly, and our prescriptive analytics workflow needs to account for that.